My name is Gong. I am from the Vancouver Debate Academy. I am representing the following Novice Oratory for the 2020 Seattle Invitational. Today, we are going to talk about why the US should take the problem of antibiotic resistance very seriously. So, first off, what is antibiotic resistance? Antibiotic resistance is a naturally occurring phenomenon where bacteria becomes resistant to antibiotics that are designed to kill. We all know that bacteria can cause disease in humans. We all know that humans have been seeking a solution to these bacterial-caused diseases for as far as our ancestors have existed. And in 1940s, we kind of succeeded by discovering antibiotics. There's many different kinds of antibiotics, and they all work differently. There are some that attack the bacteria's genome directly. There's some that break them down. They have all kinds of different mechanisms. Well, you might think that it is impossible for bacteria to become immune to those. Well, technically antibiotics are targeted to kill them, right? So why should bacteria become immune to them? Well, bacteria can become completely resistant to types of antibiotics through the process of natural selection. Natural selection is a theory brought up by Charles Darwin, where basically in a specific circumstance, the organisms that in a community that are the most fit and most adapt to the environment survives, passes on their genes, and becomes a dominant trait. In the case of antibiotic resistance, let's say a group of tuberculosis bacteria has infected a patient. That's called patient alpha. Now, patient alpha goes to the doctor's office and requests treatment. The doctor will prescribe them a complicated plan of different types of antibiotics. Let's say patient alpha takes the antibiotics and recovers from tuberculosis. Well, through this whole process, which can take up to 9 months, bacteria can become lucky, and some of them, or even maybe one of them, could randomly mutate to be immune to the antibiotics that have been prescribed to patient alpha, right? And now, after patient alpha stops taking these antibiotics, this bacteria that has immune to the antibiotics effects are going to start reproducing and basically become the dominant strain of that bacteria species, because all the rest of the bacteria that are now susceptible to the antibiotics are dead. And now that one bacteria strain that's immune to it is thriving. And we have basically created antibiotic resistance. Bacteria can develop this kind of natural selection a lot faster than other species due to the fast reproduction rate of this bacteria, right? Let's take penicillin, for example. The first ever antibiotics that was created, it was discovered in 1940. In 1942, just 2 years later, scientists and doctors are noticing penicillin-resistant bacteria, right? Obviously, there are certain types of antibiotics that is really tough for the bacteria to become resistant to. One of them is vancomycin, right? Vancomycin is another antibiotic that was discovered in 1958. Bacteria developed resistance to it 30 years later in 1988. Soon followed, humans discovered erythromycin in the 1990s, and bacteria basically became resistant to that in 2011. Right now, you're hearing a pattern where humans can't really stop bacteria from becoming resistant, but they're keeping themselves ahead of that bacteria by discovering new antibiotics while bacteria becomes immune to the old one, right? This kind of seems like a system that works, but it's a system that doesn't work any longer. And it doesn't work because of two things. Number one, the amount of antibiotics that we can discover is basically running out. And the second thing is we humans have accidentally sped up the rate of resistance in bacteria by a couple of actions that we do. But first off, the limit on the antibiotics. Humans have not discovered a new type of antibiotics for over 20 years. We haven't discovered any new antibiotics, nothing since the 2000s. That's kind of crazy because bacteria are catching up with their resistance very, very fast. And why very, very fast? Because humans have accidentally escalated the speed of bacteria developing resistance through a few common bad practices. One of them is the overuse of antibiotics in the farming industry. A side effect of antibiotics when used to treat an organism is they somehow make the organism fat or grow more. This is something that farmers would really like to harvest because, as for example, a cow farmer, you want your cows to grow bigger so that you can sell more meat for the cow, right? Consuming antibiotics on a daily basis can also kind of prevent the livestock from getting sick with different types of diseases. So it sounded like a win-win for the farmers at first. But we didn't really realize the sinister consequences. You see, bacteria that infects animals can also infect humans. The most notable example being tuberculosis. Right? Tuberculosis originally came from cows to humans, and obviously it's still in cows. And since we're giving cows a lot of antibiotics to fatten them, a lot of those antibiotics include antibiotics that are actually used to treat human diseases. According to data from the FDA, 80% of antibiotics prescribed and basically purchased in 2014 was for farm use, not for human use. And basically what this led to a problem is bacteria in these animals are getting prolonged exposure to these antibiotics over a super long period of time, right? And also these doses are not very high, so these bacteria are slowly developing resistance to those drugs. And now humans have to handle those animals by farming them, right? And now bacteria will jump from these animals to humans and start a human outbreak that is super difficult to treat because the drugs that we usually use to treat these outbreaks and these infections are now useless. This is a major problem in a lot of countries that depend on farming, notably China, the US, and certain European countries. China and those European countries mainly for the pig industry, and the US mainly for the cow industry, right? Small-scale outbreaks of these antibiotic-resistant bacteria has claimed thousands of lives across all of these fronts. Now, the second issue is the misuse of antibiotics in humans. And most notably, humans taking antibiotics when they're not required, and also humans not taking antibiotics correctly. So humans taking antibiotics when they're not necessary can basically be doctors giving patients unnecessary antibiotics, or patients basically hoarding antibiotics and taking antibiotics themselves when they don't really need it. A lot of people believe antibiotics can actually treat viral infections. This is false. Antibiotics cannot do that. And this has basically led to overuse of antibiotics, right? People also don't finish their full course of prescription because a lot of people believe that, hey, I feel good. Why should I still be eating drugs? So they stop eating their prescription. And basically, you're not going to be able to guarantee that all the bacteria in you have died. That you can't guarantee that if you don't finish your full course of prescription. So these bacteria have survived the barrage of the antibiotics. Now they're immune to it. They develop resistance, and they can do either one of two things. Number one, come back, infect, and kill you. Number two, spread to other people and start a localized outbreak of this antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Through this process, bacteria will become immune to more and more types of antibiotics. Doctors in India have found bacteria that's resistant to basically all but one type of antibiotics that are known to treat tuberculosis. All but one antibiotics are failing to treat this bacteria. This is actually very serious, right? Why do we say the US has to take an initiative on this? Because the US is a global leading power, and we see that if the US is making a change, a lot of countries follow suit. Mainly countries, for example, China, because right now, because of the political comparisons, China's trying to stay on top of the US. Well, if the US takes the initiative to cut down antibiotics use, China will do the same, because China's trying to be better than the US. A lot of countries that are trying to follow this example, for example, US allies, will do the same. And we see that with the US starts boycotting meat that has antibiotics in their production, and if the US stops prescribing antibiotics unnecessarily, and the US takes initiative to basically keep all the patients on track and get them to finish their full course of prescription, we can see that all these other countries are going to start doing the same. We can have this ricochet effect around the world where humans are starting to take the initiative to fight back against antibiotic resistance. By slowing down antibiotic resistance, we give scientists the chance to figure out alternatives to antibiotics that are harder for bacteria to become immune to. One of such candidates is immunotherapy, where scientists can genetically engineer your immune cells to fight a certain type of bacteria. But since these new technologies are at least a couple of decades in development, right now we need to halt the rate of antibiotic resistance so we can keep the human race alive for those technologies to be developed, right? We need to cut down on antibiotics usage to prevent cases like that bacteria in India that's resistant to all but one type of antibiotic that was used to treat it. Together as a united front, we can combat antibiotic resistance and keep antibiotics as the one-for-all cure. America should take this initiative. America could potentially lead the world in the fight against antibiotic resistance, and thereby saving tens of thousands of people across the world. Thank you.